Good evening and welcome to today's Master Gardener program on companion planting. I'm Dina Henshin, Head of Adult Services at Percival Library and your host today. Please feel free to send me your comments and questions during the program by using the chat feature, and I will relay them to Katie during and after the program. Katie Conaway has been a Loudoun County Master Gardener since 2018 and is the COO and Treasurer of View of Heaven Farm, a nonprofit that employs both physically disabled and neurodiverse individuals. The knowledge gained in the Master Gardener program has been indispensable in operating the farm. When she does not have her hands in dirt, she is the VP of Finance for Victory Square Partners. Welcome, Katie.
Thank you so much, Dina. I appreciate that. I really do have to give a big shout out to the Master Gardener program because it is just so wonderful and gave me such a wealth of knowledge. They taught me so much that it not only enabled me to build this farm, but also to impart this science-based knowledge back into the community, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. Okay, and thank you for hosting us.
Of course.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at our agenda. First of all, I want to discuss where all this information came from, what exactly companion planting is, and what else we need to consider. Because if the only thing that we consider is what plants go well together, we're probably not going to experience the success that we're looking for. I'm going to show you an example of a table that I use to keep track of what I've learned. And then we're going to review crops like sweet potatoes and carrots and leafy greens, peppers, garlic, cucumbers, onions. I think you probably get the picture. And then at the end, I want to take a moment to identify some of the bullies that you're going to encounter along the way. And then Q&A at the end, as Dina mentioned, but if you would like to ask questions throughout, I would love to take them. Okay, references, because good sources really, really matter. These are normally put at the end of the presentation, but there is too much information on the internet that is very wrong. So I wanted to point out early on where this presentation originated. And then wanted you to know that when researching, the best resources to use are going to come from like a .edu source or some research-based organization. The 9 books and publications that I've listed here were used to create this presentation. I want to point out that the University of West Virginia also has a great plant friend or foe chart. Cornell has some really awesome tables as well. Pest and repellent plants, plants and plants that help other plants, plants that harm other plants. And then the last reference that I mentioned here is a book that I used to confirm the identity of garden insects. It's this very massive book. It's very thick. It's got wonderful pictures. And it is my little bug Bible, or my big bug Bible. So what exactly is companion planting? I want to make sure that we're on the same page as to what we're discussing. And I really love this definition, but the organization that I quoted this from is in the UK. So that's a little bit far away for me to source much more information on this topic. So they define companion planting as the growing of different plant species close together for expected benefits in productivity through pest control, pollination, boosting fertility, and creating optimum growing environments. The most classic example of companion planting is the Three Sisters technique that originated in Mesoamerica. They found that growing corn, pole beans, and squash together created a better environment for each plant to thrive in. The corn provided the pole for the beans to grow up, and it acted as an insect cover for the squash. The pole beans climbed up the corn, and then they provided the nitrogen fixing to the soil. And the squash provided a good ground cover, and it suppressed weeds. It also repelled corn predators like raccoons. In a vegetable and small fruit garden, the plants include your crops and an assortment of herbs and flowers. The advantages of properly combining plants include pest control by attracting beneficial insects, both predators and parasitoids, and by generating smells that may deter or confuse bad bugs from getting into your crops. Pollination, by adding flowers, pollinators are attracted to your garden. By boosting fertility, by planting nitrogen-fixing plants in your garden's mix, and by promoting healthy bug populations in the soil. And lastly, would create an optimum growing environment. Different crops with different root structures in the same benefits. Also, by removing that monoculture, we're going to reduce the chances of a mass crop failure. What else do we need to consider when we're planting? So if we just start planting companions together, I think I mentioned this before, we're probably not going to get exactly what we expected. We also have to take into account the following. Crop rotation, so important. It's going to inhibit soil pathogens from propagating and bad bug populations from exploding. Feeding your soil. If you don't do that and you plant the same thing year after year, or even different crops year after year, you're going to end up depleting your soil. Soil health in and of itself is a whole different other lengthy topic. We could probably do a whole hour on that and not do it any justice. Watering, that's pretty obvious, but you can both over and underwater your plants. So knowing how much each one of your crops needs and how much has been delivered through rain. We actually put a weather station on our property so that we could know exactly how much water we had this week. And that tells us how much we have to stand over those beds with our hoses to make sure our plants get enough water. Sunlight, do you get enough to make sure light for the crops that you want to grow? Or do you get too much light? What do they need? Then there's advanced planting. Ground covers. And I won't say that I do all of these yet. I'm getting there, and there's a lot that I want to learn and that I want to incorporate into our farm. Ground covers I've done quite a bit with, but they protect the soil from the sun. They inhibit weed growth, and they also help retain moisture. Intercropping, I did a lot of that this year, and that has really proven to be spectacular. It allows for your seasonal crops to be planted in the same space in a quick succession, and this helps with your weed suppression, and it maximizes the use of the space. Cover crops are going to help fix the soil fertility, and it's also going to guard against erosion. And then trap crops are going to help pull bad bugs away from your main crop that you're trying to protect. This is a sample row plan, and it's just a partial one that I had to make it big enough so you all could actually have a chance at reading it. But it just documents for each one of our neighborhoods, as they're called in one of the books. We identify what's the crop, what's its rotation, what's its good companion, what flowers go well with it, and anything else that you need to remember, like what's living in that row permanently, or maybe what did I do last year that didn't work? What do I want to do next year? That's what I've been using them for. All right, let's look at some crops here. The first one I want to talk about are carrots and scallions. The great carrot companions are onions and leeks. They help control the carrot rust fly, and also voles do not like the roots of the onions, and it really just discourages them from being in the row, which I really appreciate. Other companions are tomatoes and peas. And while the carrots dislike the dill, the ones that are in the photo on the right-hand side here, the carrots grew beautifully next to this dill. But what was really interesting about that dill was that it did not flower. So clearly the dill didn't like the carrots. Good companion flowers here: calendula, chamomile, daisies, and then some caraway, coriander, and sage for herbs. Peppers and zinnias. I must say this is probably one of my most favorite beds every year. But one of the biggest things that I've learned is height. With the companion plants, if you get a companion that is too big, it's going to overwhelm everything else in the bed. So some cosmos that I have planted have gotten to be 3 feet high, and they really end up resembling large bushes. Those really don't work well with the peppers because they just, like I said, they completely overshadow them. So if you get the right height mixture going, you can really see that the plants do really well together. So other good companions here are marigolds. It says tall aster families, but I would keep that probably more at a minimum. And then herbs are basil, coriander. Let's look at some more pepper and zinnia here. This is just a fun picture of all of the flowers. The peppers really are thriving within here. And believe it or not, there are peppers in here. Those are shishito plants hanging over the beds at the bottom there. If I find that the plants, the flower plants are starting to overwhelm and overshadow my peppers, I do tend to cut them back and give them a nice haircut. I also have a great big joke on our farm about, yes, we grew a vegetable farm, but I will tell you that those flowers that you see in the picture those are our biggest sellers, not the vegetables. It's kind of funny. And then when you get a day like this and a site like this, it's just doesn't get any better than this in the garden. It makes our heart happy. Here's some peppers, some hot peppers and some basil. So the African blue basil here is just such a tremendously large plant when it gets to its maturity. It brought in thousands of pollinators and was so wonderful. And the Thai peppers really were thriving underneath it, as you can see all the peppers there. However, harvesting them got a little bit dicey because you really are putting your hands in amongst an enormous number of bees. I did not manage to get stung. I'm not sure how, but it made me think twice about putting the African blue basil in. Because it also took up way too much space in our bed, but it looked beautiful and it did its job. Okay, cucumbers. Cucumbers are great to fill in from an intercropping perspective after cabbage and leafy greens have been harvested. But at the end, I found that they are introverts. They really just like to be planted all by themselves. They do well with the the cabbage and the radishes and leafy greens, but really at the end, mine did fabulous this year. I had another master gardener who donated quite a few cucumber plants to the farm, and we ended up harvesting over 100 pounds of cucumbers out of this row, which for me was fantastic because I don't think I've ever done that before. I've always tried to plant them with dill and all of these kind of really smelly herbs, and they just don't like them. They want their own setup. They want their own space.
Katie, I have a question for you if you have a moment.
Yes. Yes.
Somebody is asking, it says, it looks like Katie has raised beds. I was wondering what dimensions they are and what soil she sourced to fill the raised beds.
Okay, that's a great question. So we have 4,600 square feet of raised beds. The main farm field has, there are 18 of the beds. They're 200 square feet each, which means they are built 4 feet across and 50 feet in length for that 200 square feet. And the soil that is in them, where this is built, was in a field, and the soil was very much depleted. It was an old pasture. So we backfilled these with compost that we got from Abernathy and Spencer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that compost, by the way, did fabulous. This soil is so fertile. It's been wonderful. Like I said, soil could be an entire another hour's presentation. But what we found was the soil was so loose because it hadn't compacted over time that the water really runs through it. So it has caused us to have to do some extra watering, but produce a tremendous amount of veggies. Okay, moving on to potatoes and green beans. Beans also do well with cucumbers and they do well with strawberries, but they don't like onions. The potato and the green bean trick was something I learned this year, and it worked really well. The potatoes repel the Mexican bean beetles, and the green beans repel the Colorado potato beetles, which both are an issue in my garden. However, the trick here, the real trick, is to have enough space for both of them. As you can see in this picture on the right at the bottom here, that's all the potato leaves I had to cut off because they were overshadowing the brand new little baby green beans that were coming in at the bottom of the row here. They did, I just kept trimming them back and let the green beans grow up. And you can see up in the top right, or actually that'll be on the next. Yeah, let's see. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. These are the green beans after we pulled all the potatoes out. They did great. The potatoes that were there um, kept the Mexican bean beetles at bay long enough that these plants got really big. Eventually, they did move in once the potatoes were gone. The bean beetles found them, but we didn't discover them until the beginning of August. So we really had, like I said, a very well-established crop, and we produced quite a few green beans here. There is advice out there that talks about planting your crop near aromatic herbs and that's going to keep it safer from pests. However, nothing is perfect, and that's another big warning I want to put out there with all of this. Nothing is perfect. These potatoes could not have been any closer to that large, flowering, stinky sage plant, and yet that is where the flea beetle damage was the worst. So this stuff doesn't always work, and it was still pretty at the end of the day. The potatoes did fine. Here is a row. You can see on that left side picture, there is the potatoes are interplanted with larkspur, and a lot of oregano. And in the center there, you can see Sweet William. There's more oregano and the potatoes sticking out on the right. Don't forget to add the space required for your flowers and your herbs when you're planting, because they do take up an enormous amount of space. So if you try to stuff the normal amount of potatoes in the row, which is exactly what I did, and then you've got all these flowers on top of it, they really do tend to start crowding each other out. Pretty though. Okay, and again, nothing here is foolproof. Don't expect this to work all the time. It's just it's going to help you along your way, but it's not perfect. So while it may dissuade a huge infestation, somebody's always going to get through. On the left there, you're going to see a wireworm in the potato. That's the larva of the click beetle, and he got busted in the act of eating that potato. But you can see on the right picture, it's okay, because in the end of the day, the crop was still gorgeous. Here is another example of nothing is perfect. These green beans in the center picture could not have been any closer to the marigolds. They were absolutely surrounded by them. And yet that Mexican bean beetle still managed to find them, and they just ate them right up. I will say there's some pictures here of a Mexican bean beetle throughout its life stages. And there is an amazingly satisfying pop when you squish one of these guys. Squash. Love our squash. Love that bug that just blended right into the squash there. If you plant icicle radishes at the same time as you plant your squash, the books say that this is going to reduce insects. I just learned this trick this year and I haven't done it yet, so I'm going to try it next year. But you let those icicle radishes go ahead and go to seed and flower, and that is supposed to reduce the insects. The other thing that those icicle radishes will do is, because they've got that nice long taproot, they're going to help break up any compacted soil. Nasturtiums and marigolds are also going to help reduce your squash bug and cucumber beetle population. Sunflowers will also work instead of corn from that climbing perspective. They can climb up, but you do have to, on the sunflowers, make sure that you cut back some of the lower leaves so that they're not going to shade out your understory. And this cute little bug here is a corn earworm, who, despite its name, does eat many, many different things. Oh, and a good herb companion here is the dill. Here is squash with marigolds and nasturtiums. So just some more photos here. On the left at the bottom, there are marigolds that are interplanted. And on the right, there's nasturtium. The nasturtium can get crowded out really, really easily in a squash bed. So the trick is to get the flowers and the herbs in there first, to get them a chance to get above that kind of squash line, get above those leaves, and then they will thrive. Here's a little shout out to our bug friends. On the left, you can see the squash vine borer moth. It's beautiful, but it's absolutely deadly for your squash plants. Planting the corn and the beans is going to help hide that squash from that type of pest. In the center, you're going to see a deceased squash bug. The tachnid fly that's on the right parasitizes the male squash bugs. And by attracting them into the garden, they're really going to help you out. I always like to stop and tell them how pretty they are because I think they're beautiful. And I love what they do. Okay, tomatoes and asparagus. So if you plant greens around the edge of your tomato bed early in the season, the greens are going to be finished by the time those tomatoes are taking over your beds. And if they do happen to still be going, then the nice thing is that the tomato is going to provide them shade. Tomatoes grow well together with asparagus and carrots. And I love this picture because they just look so tame and civilized here. And I think we all know what happens to a tomato plant in good soil. The tomatoes, as I mentioned, quickly take over and they crowd out everything else. So try to keep your leaves stripped up to allow the air and the sunlight for your flowers and your herb companions that are underneath. You can see here in this photo, kind of at the bottom in the center, there's a small, recently liberated basil plant there. And then there's chives in containers off to the right of the plant. So keeping that up, just letting that air in, letting the sunlight in really helps the tomato plants be healthier. Here is some more photos of tomatoes and things they're growing with. On the left, there's parsley. And on the right is the basil. Both are doing great because they were given enough light. Okay, and then asparagus here is both parsley and basil are going to help crowd out the weeds and repel the asparagus beetles. One might argue that in these photos, you might think that this basil is starting to look a little weedy itself, but they are repelling the bad bugs and they're attracting in pollinators, which is fantastic for the rest of the garden. So they can't be all that bad. Another example of some bugs, good and bad. The corn earworm on the right is also known as the tomato fruitworm. Lots of names, same bug. And then there is a massive yellow garden spider on the left there. He's looking for a little lunch. It's this spider, I had people who wouldn't walk down the aisle because it was so big. They were so afraid of it, but I thought he was beautiful and got a good picture of him. Okay, sweet potatoes. They are going to take over the entire bed that they're planted in. So unless their companion plants are taller than the sweet potatoes prior to that takeover, they don't stand a chance and they're just going to get buried. Their companions are very similar to potatoes and they grow really well with potatoes or runner or pole beans. Radishes may repel or confuse the sweet potato weevil. Again, let it go to flower. Don't try to pick it and eat it. Just let it go and do its smelly job. And then white hellebore might control leaf-eating insects. The good herb companions here, basil, dill, and anything that's a strong aromatic herb. Here's a photo of the sweet potato vines. This on the left-hand side, those were freshly dug, and you can see the sweet alyssum kind of buried up under those leaves there in the corner. And then on the right, this dill has made it above the vine. So I know that this is going to thrive, and it did. It did really well. Because leafy greens are not susceptible to diseases, they can be intercropped with a lot of different crops. The leafy greens can be planted in the tomato row and harvested before the tomatoes get huge. They, in the row in the photo here, there's a mix of arugula, there's kale, spinach, Swiss chard, there's beets, there's kohlrabi, there's radishes in there, cabbage, and broccoli. We mixed a lot of things in that row. We did that because it was in a high tunnel, and I only have 6 beds that are inside this high tunnel, so I started everything really early and mashed a lot of different things together, and they did really well. You can also see at the end of this row, we've got sage and chamomile living here. And as the cooler weather crops were taken out and the top of the high tunnel came off, we backfilled this entire row with sweet potatoes. And the intercropping, again, really helped keep down the weeds. I love this photo also because, again, these tomatoes running along the beds on the left, they just look so tame, so tame. They took a hit last night, but hopefully with the high tunnel up, we're going to get them through this tonight as well, and we'll still have tomatoes in the next couple of weeks. The other thing here that looks very tame at this point and very bushy is the raspberries on the right. We'll talk more about those later. The leafy green nemesis, the harlequin bugs. They are absolutely beautiful, but they will decimate your brassicas. Horseradish is a great trap plant in our gardens because we don't use pesticides. We spend an enormous amount of time plucking these types of insects and squash bugs right into bowls of soapy water. Okay, and then some fun photos of a garden without pesticide because it becomes a treasure trove of insect wonders here. On the left, we have a variegated fritillary chrysalis on Swiss chard. On the top, we have the swallowtail larva on parsley. This is otherwise known as the parsley worm, and it does devour an enormous amount of parsley, but that's okay. We all love it so much that we let it eat the parsley. And then on the right, we have, you can see the little green lacewing eggs on this cilantro stem. Those little eggs in there. They were really cool looking. Hey, garlic goes really, really well with most other crops except beans and peas. So planting it in the corners of our beds provides protective covers for our plants. And then we just interplant it all over the garden for its repellent factors. Again, there's something, if the moles and the voles hit the roots, they're not going to be real happy with that. They're going to move on somewhere else. This one, this was where we actually had the bulk of our garlic planted, and the bed was open by the end of June. And you have a choice here. You can either let it go absolutely crazy, which is what we clearly did with the cosmos, or you can work in an intercrop with something that can be started in July. So you could restart some cucumbers, you could start some more squash, and put something in there. It just, everything that goes in July obviously needs an enormous amount of water to get it up and running. Maybe if you've started something inside, then you could transplant it outside in July, and just hope it doesn't fry. All right, next up is onions and cosmos. This is a great example of why some of the dwarf varieties are specified as a companion. In this photo, you can see on the left-hand side, there's beautiful rows of onions, and then there's those adorable little cosmos running down the middle. However, they grew to be about 6 feet tall. They were gorgeous, seashell cosmos. We used them for our flower bouquets, but they completely overshadowed the onion crop, and we really had to give them a severe haircut in order to get the onions enough light to grow. The other thing that is amiss in this row is that onion maggots travel in a row. So if you look down at these nice, beautiful 2 rows of onions, that's not a good thing. And next year we'll be mixing them up a little bit more so that they can't just easily find the next plant. So scatter them around like the garlic. Sugar snap and snow peas. These ones go well with potatoes, they go well with beans and carrots and corn, but they don't go well with onions or garlic. They like to have asters, calendula, cosmos, marigolds, and their herb companions are dill, rosemary, sage, and thyme. This next photo is an intercropping example. And you can see here in this photo the sugar snap peas and the snow peas on the top are really, they're probably getting close to being done here because they look really very mature. And yet the squash plant is just started up. So we planted that in May. And so the squash really took over after the snow peas came out of the ground. And then the calendula that's in there is from the prior year plants that went to seed. It filled in really nicely. So how about some fruits? Strawberries, blueberries, thyme, and scallions. The strawberries like pine needle mulch that we use to decrease the soil pH in the blueberry beds, so we've started interplanting the two of them together. We also love putting in the scallions in with the strawberries and with the blueberries because it really inhibits the moles and voles from getting into those beds and eating the roots. Flower companions, borage works well in moderation, white hellebore, marigolds, and then herb companions that do well are thyme, dill, coriander, and fennel. You can see a nice little strawberry leaf poking through the thyme here. And then raspberries, bullies. This is a great transition into our garden bully topic. The raspberries spread really, really fast, and they grow tall, and they crowd out anything that's underneath it. Then they flop over and they block the paths if they're not staked up high enough. These raspberries here were staked and trellised to about 4 feet high, and they have since doubled that in height. I think they got to 7 or 8 feet high, and they have all fallen over under the weight of the berries, and you can't even walk down that aisle at this point. Companions are really difficult for this crop, and none of the source books mention a companion for them because they just tend to take over everything. But I will say that tons of pollinators are attracted into this crop to the point where sometimes it's hard to pick the berries because there's just so many bees all over them. There are also notes about not planting them near blackberries, and don't plant red raspberry varieties near a purple or a black raspberry. They just don't do well together. Here's some fun raspberry photos. Stink bugs and their eggs. And then that is a brilliant jumping spider that was found in the same area. I hope he was going to head over there and eat them up. The stink bugs do a lot of damage to the raspberries. Their eggs are so pretty. All right, let's look at some garden bullies now. Sunflowers, coneflowers, oregano, and sage are all pictured here. The sunflowers on the left are gorgeous. They're wonderful. I won't not have them in my garden, but I have to be careful of where they show up. And usually once I've planted them somewhere, they're going to show up in the same place year after year because of the seeds that have fallen. The birds love them, but they crowd out everything and they shade out everything that's underneath. So if they do show up in a bed and we do allow them to stay and don't get them transplanted, then we go ahead and we lift up those bottom leaves to try and open it up underneath. The center picture is coneflowers amidst the asparagus, and really had to take all of them out this year because they were just really crowding out the asparagus. Gorgeous, bring in the pollinators, but they'll try and take over. The same with the oregano. You can see that huge bush on the very right in the center of the row there. And that's one oregano plant. So they need some severe haircuts to keep them in line. And then the sage at the end of the row here, you can see the purple blossoms on it. That also will tend to take over. So big haircuts needed. We do, for our farm stand, we put together these really pretty little herb bouquets, and we'll go out and take the oregano and the sage and parsley and put them together in a nice little bundle. And that really does help us keep these beasts down to a minimum. And it also is kind of a forcing function. It gets us to actually harvest them and get them dried if they don't sell. The next one that we have for you here is horseradish and chamomile. Though what you're seeing there on the top picture is 3 horseradish plants that were planted in a 20-foot bed. There was at one point rhubarb in there as well, but they got completely subsumed by the horseradish. This is a huge trap crop, as I mentioned before, for the harlequin bugs. So it's really easy to just stand next to the horseradish and just knock the bugs right off into your soapy bucket. So I love it for that. Don't love it for the space that it takes. But the horseradish that you get out at the end is delicious. And then the picture on the bottom, you can really see what happens with German chamomile if it's allowed to go crazy. If you don't like chamomile tea, you should learn if you've got this. It really does make the fresh chamomile tea is really wonderful. But it needs to be harvested and pulled in. It will reseed itself and it will completely take over unless you keep it at bay. Calendula. I love this flower, and it's apparently really good for you. It is got the strangest seed, and it is incredibly prolific. You can see here, once you have it, you never have to plant it again. This whole row really just got taken over. It was a squash row, and it got taken over with the calendula. Our next one is borage. Look at that beautiful flower. And it's edible. Love that. Attracts a ton of pollinators. But beware, as you can see from the right there, it'll just, one plant is all you need and it will just take over an entire space. One nice thing about the borage is that it's a trap crop for Japanese beetles. So it's another one where you can stand there with your bucket of soapy water and just knock them in. So in the end here, it's beautiful. Does the companion planting really work? I think in some ways it really does. It's not perfect, nothing in life is. But at the end, documenting what's working well and repeating things, that rinse and repeat cycle, and really just gathering in the beauty of what it is that you've created with all these companion plants, that has really made my heart happy, and it has made my team's heart happy. They really enjoy working out in the garden. And let's see, I've got another picture here, some more bug pictures. There's a lady beetle on the left in the German chamomile. There's some tarnished plant bugs in the center there in a dahlia. And then on the left, I'm sorry, on the right, so this is the good, the bad, and the scary. The right side is the Chinese praying mantis and the marigolds. There's a lot of bugs that I've mentioned in this presentation because they really are so important to our garden and to our soil health, and they're also fascinating. And lastly, another couple pretty pictures here. By the end of the fall, right about now, your crops have been harvested. The flowers and the herbs are really filling in and they're taking over the beds, and it's just creating this glorious riot of color, and we absolutely love this. And now it's time for a Q&A. I think I'm just going to leave it right here on the screen.
Let's see. I have a question from one of our attendees that says, is there a specific trap crop for stink bugs?
I found stink bugs the most on tomatoes and raspberries. I have not found them in our herbs nor in our flowers. That's a really good question. I had never thought about it. So I don't believe that I've got a trap crop other than those nice juicy fruits that they're looking for.
Okay, let's see. Is there a trap bug for or I don't know if they meant to say trap bug or trap crop for cucumber beetles?
Not sure about a trap crop. There was something that I mentioned in there that discourages them. Let me go back and look. Let's see. It would have been in the cucumber row. Radishes might repel them.
Okay.
Yep. And then I think it's the nasturtiums are the other one.
A couple things from my own experience, and I don't have a huge vegetable garden or anything, but a couple of bully type plants that I love but like to take over are catmint that I have has gone bananas.
Yes.
Um, Mint in general, another mint plant that I have is just ginormous. The
Mhm.
coneflowers you mentioned, the Rose of Sharon, I had no idea was so prolific. We have it
Yes.
in a bed that has other things, but it's
Okay.
just gone crazy. Like the suckers keep coming up everywhere, and I keep pulling them out. I'm like, I don't want a whole bed of Rose of Sharon. Anyway, those are some of the bully
Yep.
ones
Those
that
are
I've
some
run
other ones.
into. Yeah.
We keep our
Um,
mint outside because everything that we do is inside the fence, right? To keep the deer out.
yes.
But mint is not one of those things that needs to be inside the fence because
Yeah.
the deer, nothing's going to eat it. So the mint is all outside, and we actually use that in our flower bouquets. It's a great filler in the bouquets, the native mountain mint.
I've got a couple more questions. Why, let's see, why white hellebores and not other colors?
That is what the references book said. I actually don't have any white hellebore in our books and in my beds, but that was what was recommended in the resources.
Okay. Let's see. Thank you so much for your very informative presentation. Beautiful pictures.
Thank you.
Any,
It was a pleasure to get to do this, and I appreciate the invite to
thank
share
you.
all these lovely pictures because it just makes my heart happy. Like I know I've said that a couple times, but it brings me great joy.
We appreciate it. And the programs on native plants and this kind of
Mhm.
planting and things have been super popular. So we're really grateful that you agreed to do the presentation. Thank you.
My pleasure.